Today I am going to talk about the uncertainty in forensic science and the importance of statistics in forensic science. And the objectives of the presentation uh, during the next 1 hour or so will be covering the uncertainty in scientific evidence, and we'll also review the recent forensic science practice. Then we'll discuss the cognitive and contextual bias. You must be knowing about the Innocence Project. What lessons we have learned from the Innocence Project, we will also be discussing. Then I will touch upon how statistics can be used in forensic science, and evidence evaluation and likelihood ratios will also be discussed. Then a brief description about samples, populations, and variables will be given. The association will be between variables will be discussed, and we will define probability. And then at last, we will take a case study of hypothesis testing. This case study will be is actually an actual study conducted in 1972, and I will use it here to demonstrate how hypotheses are tested and how inferences are made. So let us start. Uh, Scientific evidence is uncertain in many ways because, first of all, at the crime scene, the production of physical evidence is random and does not occur under controlled conditions. Like in scientific research, we have controlled conditions, but in forensic science, we don't have controlled conditions, and the physical evidence that is produced at the crime scene is very random, and its transfer or impression of materials to the scene, the persistence of these materials, location, the quantity and quality are also random, and they depend a lot on the amount of force or the conditions at the scene. Then uncertainty when this examination, this evidence is evaluated in the laboratory, uncertainty is also involved during the examination and the preparation of results of the examination of the evidence in the laboratory, and even during a trial in the court of law, the verdict is given based on evidence that is presented after it has been found to be admissible. And if not sufficient evidence is there, the outcome of the trial takes a different form. So this implies that evidence provides information with a given probability, and therefore its history must be ascertained only with a particular degree of certainty. Like when we reconstruct the crime scene, then we cannot say this particular event happened. We cannot say it with certainty. There is always an element of uncertainty in the reconstruction of events. And in the laboratory, when the evidence is examined, the examination methods are comparative, and these methods involve the comparison of features. While examining the evidence, the examiner looks for the similarities in the evidential items, that is the questioned and the specimen evidence, as well as dissimilarities. What are the differences? And will determine whether or not the examiner can differentiate between the two items, depending on the similarities as well as the dissimilarity in the evidence. And needless to say, dissimilarities are always observed, and the examiner shall always take them into account. Unfortunately, sometimes the examiners always only look at the similarities between evidence items. They don't give importance to dissimilarities, but it is very essential that we should also take into account the dissimilarities, right? So The examiner describes while declaring a so-called match between these two sets of items, that is the evidential item and the specimen item, there is always a confidence level in terms of probability. And you must all understand that is there is no perfect match or absolutely no match. It is not a binary decision, yes or no approach, or a black and white approach like here, but the result, the information provided after the examination has various shades of gray, and it is not as discrete as in the yes or no yes or no binary approach. Sorry. And there is a degree of certainty and in terms of probability. It is expressed in terms of probability. This is called a probabilistic approach to evidence interpretation. And even in a trial, this probabilistic interpretation plays a role. As you must be aware that defendant is assumed innocent till proved guilty. And the burden of proof is on the prosecution. That is, the prosecution has to present evidence that proves the guilt of the defendant. And the court evaluates the evidence and pronounces the verdict of guilty or not guilty. How it is done, I'll discuss later on. So the evidence matters in a verdict. If the evidence is strong enough to reject the assumption of innocence, the verdict is guilty. If the evidence is not strong enough, then the verdict is not guilty. And there is just enough or not enough. Depending, when you say, when the court decide whether to convict or exonerate the person, there should be enough evidence or not enough evidence for the verdict to happen. And interpretation of the physical evidence after laboratory examination is also very important. And interpretation means to assess and to understand the evidential value of the results of observations with regard to the context of the case at hand. We'll also take up this later on. So, given the nature of physical evidence that we have discussed so far, that physical evidence is random, and the processes to which it undergoes, like in the laboratory, statistics and probability are the reasoning and operating tools to describe and measure the uncertainties related with the evidence. So, statistics and probability are very important to quantify the uncertainties involved in the physical evidence and its examination. And this need for statistics and probability is not new. And even as back as 1953, Paul Kirk stated that in the court of law, it is often not recognized that all identification is purely a matter of probability. Sometimes I wonder when people, when examiners, they give very categorical opinion, that is, yes, identified, absolute match, but it is not like that. And the identification is a matter of probability. And in another article he wrote, indicated that while it may be both correct and useful, too much room still exists for honest disagreement between witnesses. Much of this problem would be avoided if systematic study were devoted to the development of sound probability considerations applied to evidence interpretation, and also to assess to the areas in which statistics could properly contribute to correct evaluations. So to sum this up, statistical analysis is very important for correct evaluation of the physical evidence and its interpretation. All of you must be aware of a 2009 study of the National Research Council, and a report entitled Strengthening Forensic Science in the United States, A Path Forward, was published in 2009. In this report, the current practices of forensic science, as well as all the other forensic disciplines, have been revised. And 13 recommendations were given to improve the reliability of these identification sciences. I urge all of you to go through this report. It is available on the internet, and it's a real eye-opener. And this report says that despite the lack of statistical foundation in these disciplines, examiners still make probabilistic claims based on their experience. They are not using real probability studies, but based on they try to translate their experience into probabilities, just to sound correct in terms of probability. This NIAS report says particularly that the current forensic science system is not based on science. The analysis is frequently subjective. There is a lot of there is an element of subjectivity involved in the interpretation of evidence, and even the same techniques used by different analysts on same evidence can result in different outcomes, different results. And then when testimony, they are providing testimony, they say, in my training, knowledge and experience, they base their opinion on their training, knowledge and experience. And they don't disclose the basis upon which they make their opinions. And this report further says that there is a lot we do not know about other forensic disciplines except DNA fingerprinting. Considerably more research and development is needed to provide a rigorous evaluation of the capacity of a method to consistently and with a high degree of certainty demonstrate a connection between the evidence and the specific individual or source. This report does not cast any doubt on the DNA evidence, because this report, according to this report, DNA evidence can consistently and with a high degree of certainty demonstrate a connection between the evidence and the specific individual. You must all be aware of this thing. DNA evidence has a high degree of individualization associated with this. And according to the NIAS report, the DNA evidence, DNA fingerprinting has a reliable scientific methodology, right? And the extent to which the practitioners in a particular forensic disciplines rely on human interpretation that could be tainted by error, the threat of bias, or the absence of sound operational procedures and robust performance standards. These are the requirements of good scientific evaluation. Then this report also talks about bias. The examiners may be affected by bias. This bias may be unconscious also. And there are many types of biases. One is confirmation bias. And in the confirmation bias, there is a tendency to seek confirming rather than disconfirming evidence. Whatever evidence supports the pre-existing beliefs, confirms the pre-existing beliefs of the examiner, these are considered, and disconfirming evidences are not given much importance. And there is also a tendency to recall confirming evidence in a biased manner. And there is a tendency to interpret the ambiguous evidence in a manner that confirms pre-existing beliefs. What is meant by ambiguous evidence is that the evidence that can go anyway, then it is interpreted to be in line with the pre-existing beliefs of the examiner. Then there are also role effects. People's perception of their role can influence their decisions. For example, if the examiners think that they work for the prosecution or they work for the police, then they will have a tendency so that their decisions will be influenced towards the prosecution's hypothesis. And this is a risk because many forensic science laboratories in the world are within the law enforcement department. This is a big concern that has been reflected in the NAS report. Then contextual bias is also there. Contextual bias means when extraneous information is provided to the examiner related to the case. For example, if in addition to the physical evidence, we also receive some background information about the evidence, how this evidence was collected, and sometimes there is a whole detail of the so-called happenings in the case, all the details of how the accused perpetrated the crime on the victim, and sometimes this information may influence our decision making, and this is called contextual bias. And it is not that these problems were reflected in the NAS report only, that is NAS report only, but you must also be aware of the Innocence Project. You can go through this site, and according to the Innocence Project, unreliable or improper forensic science played a role in some 50% Innocence Project cases. That is, in this Innocence Project, some old cases are being re-examined in light of the DNA evidence, because DNA evidence is said to be conclusive and with a high degree of certainty. And some convictions that resulted 30 years or 40 years back, they are again being reopened. These cases are being reopened. And it has come to light that many of such convictions have been set aside. And there are many reasons of this overturning of the convictions, that many reasons of the acquittal, and faulty forensic science had a role in at least 50% of the Innocence Project exonerations. You can also go through these details. This is the graph plot that shows that in addition to false testimony, false confessions, and eyewitnesses error, forensic science was also a contributing factor to the faulty convictions, wrongful convictions, right? It's more than 50%. And there are two parts of this faulty forensic science. One is improper testimony, proper technique, but improper testimony. That is where the examiner, while testifying to defend his report, has exaggerated his opinion. The testimony was proper. So, is not useful and inadmissible. There are serious concerns with forensic science, but that does not mean that all forensic evidence is not useful. But one has to keep in mind that it is not infallible, and it has limited limits that should not be exceeded. There are limits to scientific evidence, and the scientific experts, the forensic science professionals, should not exceed these limits. Now we'll come to the Daubert criteria of admissibility of evidence. And according to this standard, there are 4 criteria: that the technique used should be testable, it should have known error rates, and it should have been subjected to peer review and publications, and it should be generally accepted. Most important is that of error rates. There is no technique that is fully free from errors. There are always errors associated with a technique. Can you absolutely measure anything? Suppose you have to find the concentration of some uh, element in the glass of water. Can you always say definitely that this is the right amount, this is the amount? No, you cannot say. You only give the amount plus or minus some error. That is, some uncertainty is always there. And when you examine that glass of water using different techniques, the water in the glass using different techniques for that particular element, you will have different results, and you have different confidence interval or uncertainty associated with the concentration. So there is no absolute uncertainty in the techniques, and there is always a error rates, and these error rates should be known. One should not say that my method is totally error free. No, it is not impossible. You should give error rates. You should know, and you should give the error rates. And error rates refer to the number of errors observed during the application of a given technique for a defined number of trials. Error rates are proportions of cases in which the experiment led to false conclusions over the total number of experiments of the same kind conducted. And nowadays, the forensic scientists recognize that their methods are not error-free. However, they are incapable to objectively quantify the limitations of their techniques as well as the risk that an error occurs. So this is very important. They should be able to objectively quantify the limitation of their techniques. And statistical methods and the probabilistic methods are the ways to accomplish such an endeavor. So how can statistics be used? Statistics is used in R&D, in lab methods, and statistics is useful for development of databases and interpreting the association of evidence with the databases. And statistics is also used to evaluate evidence. And now, can you see that why DNA fingerprinting passed the NAS scrutiny? All of you must be aware that DNA has a sound statistical basis. That is why it passed the NAS scrutiny. And there is a need to incorporate statistics, probability for other evidence types as well. For example, trace evidence databases will help in determining the typicality of particular evidence or frequency of observing the particular characteristics, and that may help to increase the evidential value of these trace evidences. And what is evidence evaluation? Evidence evaluation is done by the use of statistics and probability. There are 2 hypotheses. One is the prosecution hypothesis and the other is the defense hypothesis. The prosecution hypothesis is that the accused is involved, and the defense the defense hypothesis is that the accused is not involved. This is also called the null hypothesis. Null hypothesis means the status quo. As I earlier said, the person is assumed innocent till proven guilty. So the null hypothesis is that the person is innocent or he is not involved. And if we have sufficient evidence that can refute this null hypothesis, then we accept the alternate hypothesis and we say that the person is involved in this. And we also use the likelihood ratio approach. What is likelihood ratio approach? This likelihood ratio is expressed in the form of a dividing these two, one numerator and one denominator. The numerator is the probability of the evidence given the hypothesis. P is E given the hypothesis, that is evidence given the same source hypothesis, that is that the person is involved. Whereas the denominator gives the probability of the evidence if we assume that the person is not involved. The ratio of these two probabilities is called the likelihood ratio, and this likelihood ratio gives the strength of evidence. The more this likelihood ratio is, the more we will say, the more confident we will be to say that the person is involved in the crime. This likelihood ratio incorporates not just similarity, but also typicality. The numerator of the likelihood ratio, this numerator is the similarity term. How similar is the evidence to the same source hypothesis, and this denominator tells what is the prevalence of this evidence in the general population for any other person in the population. So in calculating the strength of evidence, the forensic practitioners must consider not only the degree of similarity between the samples, but also their degree of typicality with respect to the relevant population. And in a graphical way, this can be presented like this. This blue curve, this signifies the distribution of a particular parameter for that person. That is, this is an example of the fundamental frequency of the voice of a person. And this fundamental frequency for that person on various occasions varies from 100 to say 200 hertz. And the distribution is something like this. Whereas the same feature is prevalent in the general population from 0 to 180 hertz. This red curve signifies the distribution of this parameter in the general population. Now suppose we have a value, we have a questioned evidence that has some value here between 160 and 118. We will evaluate the probability of this evidence belonging to the blue curve and belonging to the red curve. And we will find the ratio of these two heights from here to here divided by from here to here. Like you can see, like in the likelihood ratio here is about 11.35. You can easily see that this value is not very typical of the general population, because the typical value of this parameter for the general population is 100. It is very atypical, very rare for this population. But this has a certain value for the person here. So the typicality, similarity, as well as typicality is involved in the calculation of the likelihood ratio. I have been using this likelihood ratio in various research problems related to forensic voice comparison and even facial examinations. And we will have some sessions sometimes so that we can share these findings. And then using the Bayes theorem, we evaluate the evidence. And what is the criteria for evaluation of evidence? That is, we must have prior odds. Prior odds are the odds of involvement of the particular person, and these prior odds are influenced by the circumstances of the case. And then the examiner gives the likelihood ratio. And multiplying the prior odds with the likelihood ratio give the posterior odds. And in this way, by analyzing the posterior odds and combining other forms of evidence, the trier of fact, that is the judge, can give the verdict of guilty or not guilty. As an example, as an example, I give you, suppose there are some 100 missing persons in a population. 100 missing persons in a population, and 75% of these missing persons are males and 25% of these missing persons are female. Right? And then we recover a particular evidence. Say, I would say some bone, some long bone. And we have some data that relates the length of the bone with the sex of the person. And then if I have found the likelihood ratios related with this, that if I recover a particular bone of say 30 centimeter, what is the likelihood ratio? What is the likelihood that we obtain a bone of 30 centimeter length given that a person is a male, and the same bone given the person is a female? Suppose the likelihood ratio comes out to be 5. This likelihood ratio will be found from the various from a study we have already performed. Right? We have this database. Then, as I told you, the prior odds are of a male, because I said 75% are males and 25% are female. And then the odds are 3:1. That is 3 divided by 1, 3. Prior odds are 3. And the likelihood ratio that we obtained was 5 in favor of the male hypothesis. Then when this 3 will be multiplied by 5, we will have the posterior odds, that is 3 into 5, 15. It will become 15. That is, the prior odds are now multiplied by the likelihood ratio, and it becomes posterior odds. This is the way how we use likelihood ratios in the evaluation of evidence. So what is statistics? Statistics is a science of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data. And the goal of statistics is to acquire understanding from them. And when we make inferences, suppose we want to draw inference about a general population, then we cannot study the population as on a whole. We take a sample from that population. Suppose we want to survey a particular city, then we cannot take sample from each and every person of the city. We select a sample of the population, say 100 or 200 persons. And then we summarize this data using numbers, tables, or graphs. This is called descriptive statistics, and this is applicable for the sample of the population. And this data can be analyzed, and we can detect patterns, and we can draw inferences about the whole population. And this is called inferential statistics. From the descriptive statistics, we come to inferential statistics. That is, from the sample, we generalize about the whole population. These are the two types of statistics. And then you must be able to discriminate between the variables, samples, and populations. Statistics involve the study of a set of equivalent objects from which some characteristics, these characteristics, attributes, or features are called random variables. Suppose we are studying a population, and there are some characteristics of population, like say height of a person. Attributes, maybe attributes and features are same thing. These are variables. And what are these variables? Say height of the person, the length of the humerus bone, or the length of the femur bone. These are all attributes of the sample. And statistics exploits the properties of these properties of the population, because there is always a variability. That is why these characteristics or features, these are called variables, because they vary in the population among the various instances of that sample. Right? For one person, the height will be some value. For other person, it will be different. Third person, it will be. All the features will vary in the population. These are variables. And there is a difference between survey and census. Census applies to the whole population, whereas survey refers to taking samples from the whole population. And then we generalize the result of this survey to the whole population. And there are different types of variables. Variables are numerical variables, and variables are also categorical variables. Numerical variables have numbers associated with them. These may be continuous, or these may be discrete. Continuous numerical variables means a variable that has any value. For example, the height of a person. The height of a person can be any value. It may be, suppose, 172 centimeter, 172.1 centimeter, 172.2 centimeters, like this. But the discrete variables have only discrete values, 0, 1, 2, 3, like this. It is not allowed. Fractional values are not allowed in the discrete variables. In categorical variables, we have categories instead of numbers, like male or female. These are categories, right? True or false is a category. And some are regular categorical variables, some are ordinal variables. Ordinal variables are categorical variables are those like temperature, cold, warm, warmer, and hot, right? There is a certain gradation on the scale. These are called ordinal variables. And when we talk about variables, we also discriminate between associated variables or independent variables. Two variables are said to be associated if one variable depends on the other, whether directly or inversely. Then these are associated variables, or these are also called dependent variables. And when two variables are not associated, there is no evident connection between the two, then they are said to be independent. So there is a notion of dependent variables and independent variables. And correlation and contingency table. Correlation is useful to know the association between numerical variables, numerical data. When we have numerical data, we use correlation. And when we have categorical data, then we use the contingency table or chi-square test. And like here I have plotted, we have a plot of the density of a glass and the refractive index of a glass. You can see this is the scatter plot of density and refractive index. You can see that you can fit a line in the on the graph like this. This means there is an association between the density and the refractive index of glass. As the density increases, the refractive index also increases. There is an association between the so different this refractive index and density, they are called dependent variables or associated variables. For categorical variables, we prepare contingency tables. We suppose there are two variables of gender and say one promotion. It has categorical value of male and female and promotion, promoted and not promoted. Then we find the number of males promoted and number of males not promoted, number of females promoted and number of females not promoted, and we plot like this, and we divide, find the percentages of males promoted or not promoted in this way. So these are called contingency table, and I will show you later on in the case study. Now, what is the notion of probability? Probability is the study of randomness, or it's the measurement of the uncertainty. And probability of the random event is defined as the proportion of times that an event E occurs in many repeated trials of a random phenomenon. Right? Like simplest way to understand probability is, suppose if we toss a coin, it can end up with heads up or tails up. What is the probability of landing it heads up? It is 0.5. That is 50% of the time it will land heads up and 50% tails up. And this is the frequentist definition, that outcomes of in E and the total number of possible outcomes. Like one number of outcomes is, suppose the outcome is heads up. So this is one outcome, and there are two number of possible outcomes, either heads up or tails up. So the frequency is 1/2. Number of favorable outcomes divided by the total number of possible outcomes. This is called the frequentist definition of probability. And we also define this probability as any outcome, probability of any outcome as a random event of a random event is the proportion of times that the outcome would occur in a very long series of repetitions. And the number of objects in a given category are called frequency for that category. So this picture shows the probability. Suppose if we make a number of tosses, this is the number of tosses. If we toss the one coin once, the probability of heads may be 0, right? And this is the probability of tails. And second times it changes. The like suppose we say that the probability of heads coming up will be 0.5, but when you toss a coin, it will not be head, it is 0. If you toss it 2 times, it may again be 2 times tails, again 0. And toss is 3 times, one head comes up. But that there is a difference between the heads coming up and the actual predicted outcome. But when we repeat this trial a number of times, large number of times, then this proportion of heads will approach 0.5, that is half 0.5. That is given by the probability of 0.5. This probability will be approached in a very large number of trials. This is how we visualize probability. Then there is a Bayesian probability. What I described earlier is frequentist probability. There is a Bayesian probability, and Bayesian probability expresses the degree of belief with respect to the occurrence of a given event. And these probabilities are conditional. These probabilities are conditional in the sense that assigning a probability for the occurrence of an event, information is required. Right? Like you can give here an example of a tennis competition or a cricket match. Huh? Just to elucidate this point, suppose there is a cricket match between two countries. Then an event is going to happen, and you have to predict that which country will win the match. Then one way is to find the probability of a country winning the match. One way is to enumerate all the matches played between the two countries, and then number of the matches one country won. Suppose there are two countries A and B, and about 100 matches have been played between the two countries, and country A has won 60 matches from that country. Then we assign the probability 0.6, that there is a probability of 0.6 that country A will win the match. This is a frequentist definition. But sorry, there's a power cut here. Just a minute, please. In Bayesian probability, are you able to hear me or see me?
Oh, not an issue, sir.
So the Bayesian probability has the associated belief with it. And I was giving the example of two countries playing a cricket match, and 0.6 was the frequentist probability assigned with the particular country winning the match. But now some other person, some expert, maybe going a step further, he may be analyzing the type of pitch that is involved. For example, you know that pitches in India are slower, and pitches in Western countries, Australia, etc., are very fast pitches. So if we also know what type of pitch, on what type of pitch the match is going to be played, then these probabilities will change, and the Bayesian probability assigned will be different than the frequentist, because a knowledge of the pitch is also involved in that. Suppose country A is not very good at playing on that pitch, that particular type of pitch, then the probabilities will change. Okay, so this definition of Bayesian probability. Then finally, I come to a case study of gender discrimination. This study was done in 1972 as a part of study on gender discrimination. And in this study, 48 male bank supervisors were each given the same personal file and asked to judge whether the person should be promoted to a branch manager job that was described, and this was described as routine. This is how these studies are conducted. The files were identical, except half of the supervisors had file showing the person was a male, while the other half had file showing the person as a female. The content of the file was same, but half of the supervisors were given that these files pertain to males, and half were given that these files belong to females. And it was randomly determined which supervisors got male applications and which got female applications. Of the 48 files reviewed, 35 were promoted. And the objective of this study was testing whether females are unfairly treated, discriminated against, or not. Right. So this was the objective of the study, to determine whether females are unfairly discriminated against or not. So given this data, now we see that we have prepared a contingency table. That is, out of 24 males, 21 males were promoted and 3 were not promoted. And out of 24 females, 14 were promoted and 10 were not promoted. So the number of percentage of males promoted was 0.875, and the percentage of females promoted was 0.582. there is always almost a difference of about 29% in the proportions of males and females promoted. Now, how do we make inference from such studies? There is a difference of that is about 30%. One is the null hypothesis, that there is nothing going on and promotion and gender are independent and no gender discrimination is there, and the observed differences in proportion is simply due to chance. This is the null hypothesis. If these proportions of the differences in the proportions can simply come by chance, then we say that there is nothing going on and the null hypothesis is true. But if something is going on and promotion and gender are dependent, then there is a gender discrimination and the observed differences in proportion is not due to chance. This is called alternative hypothesis. So these are two competing claims. Now we see how our evidence fits into these claims and which claim is justified. And for this, a simulation is done, an experiment is done using a deck of playing cards. And you know that a pack of playing cards has face cards as well as number cards. So you take out aces. There are exactly 13 face cards, A, K, Q, J, right? 13 face cards long, and there are 35 number cards, right? Take one out of the 36 number cards, one is taken out, and there are 35 number cards left in the deck, 2 to 10. Okay, because there were 48 promotions. As you see this, there were 48 files and 35 were promoted and 13 were not promoted. So we deliberately choose the 13 face cards to represent not promoted and the 35 number cards to represent the promoted. And then we shuffle the cards and deal them into two groups of size 24, representing males and females. Shuffle the cards and deal them into two groups. And the count and record how many files in each group are promoted. Number cards, how many number cards are there and how many face cards are there. And calculate the proportion of promoted files to each group and take the difference, male minus female. So repeat this step many times like this. These are 35 number cards and these are 13 face cards. You can also do this experiment on your own. When we shuffle these cards and then find how many number cards are there and how many face cards are there, then we see that in this particular instance, 18 should be promoted out of 24. That is 0.75 should be the males promoted. And the fraction of females promoted should be 0.708. This is purely due to chance. So due to chance, the difference is only 0.042. 0.042. And you repeat this a number of times. You repeat it many times. And then you plot a graph. Or say for 100 such simulations, you plot a dot plot that shows the difference in the promotion rates. And you see then that most of these values will be centered around 0. That is, due to chance, they will be randomly, there will not be much difference between this. 0 difference will be there somewhere. And as the difference goes up, the proportion also falls. This is almost normally distributed. And you see that because we obtained a difference of promotions between males and females to be 29%, like somewhere here. The difference was somewhat here. Had the probability been 0 or somewhere near, then we would have maximum probability. The p-value would have been maximum. But in order to observe this difference, the p-value of this curve at this point is very small. when the p-value is very small, we reject the null hypothesis and we say the alternate hypothesis is true. Because by chance, had this happened only by chance, then the differences would not have been much. It would have been, the difference would have been close to 0 or say 10% or this. But it is far away from this 0 and it is 30%, almost 30% here. Then the p-value for this will be very small. And when the p-value is very small, we reject the null hypothesis and we accept the alternate hypothesis. This shows that due to the low p-value, we can infer that females are unjustly discriminated against in matters of promotion. Of course, I don't. I'm using this study only as a demonstration, and it is a very old study. But all the scientific studies done at present, they follow these basic principles of evaluation. So this is what we have discussed in this session. We have discussed the uncertainty in scientific evidence, then recent review of forensic practice. We also touched upon cognitive and contextual bias, then the innocence project, then what is the likelihood ratio, samples, population, and variables, what is association between variables, then we define probability, and then we discuss the hypothesis testing using a case study. I hope I have been able to give you a very concise overview of the use of statistics in forensic science. Not exactly forensic science, but how it can be used in forensic science. And just to make you introduce you to the concept of statistics. And of course, there are